are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. We are going to have a beautiful, functional, light-filled, easy-to-access space with bathrooms downstairs in what we call the basement now, but next year we're all going to call it the first floor. And it has been amazing to watch you all vision and fundraise and come together to get this done. We could not be more excited. We are going to have a beautiful, functional, light-filled, easy-to-access space downstairs. It is coming. It is close. But first, we have to clean out the cabinets. Lydia and I started this week, and Alan Dowdy came and hauled some stuff to the transfer station yesterday. Thank you, Alan. And beloveds, it is gross down there. We've stopped using those classrooms because they are far from bathrooms and not in great shape. And in our absence, the mice moved in. So a large part of our workflow this week was pulling mouse poop-covered ancient art supplies, abandoned half-completed church school art projects, and my favorite, a 1,000-pound ping pong table that I briefly thought had broken my finger, and it didn't, and getting all that stuff out of the building. But this is how it works, right? We are not going to be able to have new and exciting things unless we pull out the yucky things, look at them, go through them, acknowledge them, and figure out what there is to be done. And this is what the prophets, especially the minor pre-exilic prophets, which we are studying now, which we are preaching through this week, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, this is what they are doing. They are pulling open the metaphorical cabinets and pointing to all the mess inside. They are taking the people of Judah and the people of Israel by the hand, and they are pointing out the bad news. The bad news. Micah. The poor are being oppressed. The bad news. Nahum. We are confusing military might with right. The bad news. Habakkuk. We are suffering, oh God. The bad news. Zephaniah. There is corruption here. We have become as corrupt as our neighbors. We are not behaving like the people of God. The bad news. God is slow to anger and full of love, but there are ways that we are living that are unsustainable. And God will not allow them to sustain. And I won't lie to you, the prophets are a bummer as a genre. There are 15 prophetic books, 3 long ones, which we call the major prophets, basically because they're long, and 12 short ones, which we call the minor prophets. And the prophets take our faces and they turn them right to the mess. They open the cabinets. They march us to the hurt and the pain and the things we've been avoiding. And we don't want to look. We don't want to deal with it. I often don't. And not only do we sort of intrinsically not want to look at the mess and the hurt, but we're in this moment in history where a lot of voices are telling us to prioritize our own happiness, as if individual happiness is the highest achievement possible for a human life. And because we're being told to be happy all the time, the flip side of that is that is an encouragement not to look at some of the hard places. We're in this moment in history where people are unironically posting things like good vibes only on their Instagram or online dating profiles. Good vibes only is a very small slice of the human experience, a very small part of life. A lot of your neighbors are left out if you're good vibes only. Amen? Amen. And so in this moment in history, we need the prophets now more than ever. We need the prophets. We need them to point, because we do not get to the good news. We do not get to the good, exciting, new possibilities, new life, until we look at the bad news. We do not get the new church school classrooms before we clean out all that mouse poop. We do not open State Street Shelter before we get the call from the Portland schools that there are kids sleeping in the parking lot, that a child is in the hospital with hypothermia, that there's no more money for emergency housing, no way forward. If we do not take that call, we don't see what comes after. We do not get Easter without going to the tomb, without the tragedy and the rage and the grief and the mess. The bad news comes first. And when we skip it, when we avoid it, when we run from it, well, then we miss the good news too. And it's not that the prophets are focused often on social justice, right? They're talking about a whole nation. But in our lives, there are also smaller moments. One of the hardest things to do is to go into a hospital room, or to go into an assisted living facility or a rehab unit and see the aftermath of illness or accident or stroke. And this is especially true when it's someone we know or love who we are visiting. Because often in those rooms, all we can see is the bad news. The once strong hands that now can't hold a coffee cup. The once clear voice that is now struggling to form words. The once brilliant mind that is now confused and befuddled. And sometimes, because it is so hard, it's easy to not go. I've had lots of folks say to me, "Pastor, I just can't go see her or him like this." And then folks don't visit because the bad news is too much. And I'm not condemning that, by the way. It's harder the closer you are to a person. And also, every single one of our disciples ran from the cross. We do just hit our capacity. We hit our limit. But there is a ministry in our church, and it's a ministry that we don't see very often. And it's a ministry that holds the bad news, that in some ways runs towards the bad news, the mess, the hurt. Folks who prepare for it almost every day. that is our prayer shawl ministry. Our prayer shawl ministry is made up of people who take time, most days, and to prepare for pain and mess and disaster. They don't shy away from the possibility, but instead pray over it with their hearts and their words and their hands. And they knit these beautiful shawls. And they bring them here a couple times a year. This is coming in just a minute. They bring them here to us, and we all bless them so that our blessings are woven in too. And then when someone is sick, or when someone is in grief or in trouble, we bring them a prayer shawl. And we wrap them in prayers and love and warmth, like a hug from the whole church. And this ministry is especially faithful because while some people walk out of hospital rooms and miracles do happen, we don't always get to see the good news on this side of the veil. And the Bible is honest about that. We're not always going to have the bigger picture or get the Hollywood ending. And that can be when the hard news is especially difficult to look at, when we know that we won't see the good news ourselves, even if we believe in it. And so what the prayer shawl ministry reminds us of is that even when the good news feels far from us, we ourselves can foreshadow it. We can bring it closer with a shawl, with a visit, with a hug, with a card. We can wrap someone in love that they can see and feel, and that we can see and feel. And we can tell them and ourselves, this moment that we're in, this is the bad news. This is the bad news. But the good news is coming. We can bring a taste of God, a bit of the fruit of heaven into the room. Because the good news does come. Churches who worried that they would dwindle end up demoing their basements to help accommodate more kids and meet the childcare crisis and pass on the faith. Communities who thought there was no way forward open their doors and house their neighbors. The tomb opens. New life breaks forth. Good news comes. But the bad news comes first. And the good news is made a lot of the time through people doing inconvenient and hard things. Things like the things God did and does for us. Labors of love, of cleaning, of justice, of community. Labors of knitting. Labors that start right where the mess is. So this week, as we go out into the world, let us look for the bad news. Let's seek it out. And when we find it, let us figure out how we can be part of the good news that is to follow. Because we can do this in full and joyful confidence. Because we labor in and with God. God who tells us that there is good news. Good news for us, good news for our neighbors, and good news for the world. What a blessing to be able to live in the confidence of that hope. Praise be to God, and amen.